I just have a couple of announcements before I welcome Mother Agapia Stephanopoulos and Pastor Tom Harris. Dina, who put this together with me, wants to mention a couple things. One is that Mother Agapia will also be in Morgan Hill tomorrow, and there's information on the table, and so if you can invite friends to that. Also, there is an important thing to pledge to oppose sending tax money to Israel. Please go to the front table and then you can sign that document. And then lastly, put together by beautiful people, we have an honoring of the children of Palestine at the Santa Clara County Government Center in San Jose. It's going to be up for the whole month of February. It's an art exhibit. And the reception and the program will be on February 11th at noon. So please join that. So first, I just want to say good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to First Presbyterian Church, Palo Alto. We are gathering to sit at the intersection of culture, faith, and moral witness, a space where art, lived experience, and spiritual truth illuminate one another. First Presbyterian Church, Palo Alto is an inclusive church with a long history of standing with the oppressed and our moral obligation for humanity and social justice. In moments of profound political violence and erasure, culture becomes not only expressions, but survival, a way of remembering, resisting, and emphasizing that Palestinian people's humanity. Mother Agapia joins us as someone who lived among Palestinian communities in the West Bank, someone who broke bread with families, prayed beside them, and saw firsthand that occupation does to people's daily lives. Her voice carries a rare weight of lived experiences, the small, intimate truths that never make the headlines. Well, it made those headlines. And the moral clarity that emerges only from proximity. So as a short bio, Mother Agapia, she is an Orthodox Christian nun and a humanitarian who lived and worked in the West Bank for years, serving Palestinian families, students, and faith communities. Her ministry placed her directly inside the daily life under occupation, where she witnessed the resilience, hospitality, and cultural richness of Palestinians, along with the systemic violence, segregation, and restrictions imposed on them. Mother Agapia has challenged common American misconceptions and spoke candidly about the realities Palestinians face. Her work bridges spiritual witness, humanitarian service, and cultural understanding, offering a rare, deep human perspective from someone who lived among Palestinian communities. So today, Mother Agapia continues to speak publicly about faith, justice, and the moral calling to stand with oppressed communities. And for this reason and so much more, we are honored to host her today. Welcome. You guys know. So while they're getting situated, today is not only a discussion, but an invitation to listen deeply, to confront uncomfortable realities, and to recognize the beauty and resilience that define Palestinian identity. Pastor Tom Harris has prepared some thoughtful questions to discuss with Mother Agapia for about 30 minutes. And then we will take questions from the audience, both here and online. My name is Deborah Leese. I will also be monitoring the questions. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Pastor Tom to introduce himself.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Tom, and just welcome again to First Presbyterian Church. This church has a long history of standing with the oppressed, as Deborah Leese mentioned, at least back into the 80s and even to the 70s, when people like Robert McAfee Brown were raising up the idea of liberation theology, which comes out of South America. It's an idea that we read the Bible in a way that acknowledges God's preference for the poor and the oppressed throughout Scripture. And from that reading, this church grew a heart for immigration justice in particular, and especially the immigrants from South and Central America. But also from that reading about justice and liberation for all people came our stances on LGBTQ equality, racial justice, climate justice. And as we've become more and more aware and awake to what's happening in Palestine, Palestinian justice. And now as we see, as Deborah Leese has taught me the term, the imperial boomerang, that as what we have done to other people throughout the world comes back now to places like Minneapolis and LA and San Francisco and San Jose, and touches on not just our immigrant brothers and neighbors, but all of us who are in fact all immigrants here on this land, but who are all now facing the terror of a fascist uprising in America. So we at this church stand with justice on all of these issues. And so that's why we are so thrilled to have somebody like Mother Agapia here with us. Welcome, Mother Agapia.
Thank you, Pastor. Good to be here. Appreciate having the people here, and I can tell already all the work and activity people are doing to support, well, equal rights and justice for all, here and in Palestine.
Thank you. That video, I think, was a great start because it introduces us to the idea that Christians live in Palestine. Christians live in the West Bank.
For a while.
And there's certainly a lot of, I think, people who might not even know that, or who only think of it as a place where Muslims live and where Jews live, and that's the centerpiece of the conflict. But you're a Christian, and you lived in the West Bank for quite a while. So tell us about how you arrived in the West Bank, what brought you there, and your experience.
Right. Well, it's obvious I'm an Orthodox Christian nun, and I started out my path to monasticism after college, and realizing that I believed in social justice, thought I was going to be a lawyer, but I got called after attending a traditional church, actually, to see that the depth of my orthodoxy was bringing me to monastic life. For a few years, I was in upstate New York, and then our Orthodox church had convents on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. So that's what first brought me. And to be quite honest, the first year and a half, my purpose was to live the traditional Orthodox Christian life, which meant, as a nun, we weren't really so proactive socially. It was a life 7 hours a day in prayer, in the church services, the rest of the time in obediences, keeping up the place, and then in silent prayer and work on your spiritual life in your cell. So in reality, had very little to do with the outside world. If you had asked me back when I went there in 1996, what was the old city of Jerusalem, what was the new city, what was Palestine, what was Israel, had very little idea. But in 1998, I was asked to run our school in Al-Azhariyah. The church had a school, which at that time had 350 day students, mostly Muslim girls. As well, we had Christian boarding students who were from the Bethlehem and Bet Jala, the West Bank area towns. And so it was from there that I got to really become aware of the Palestinian communities. And the very first thing, and I think it's always important, because so I went there in 96, went to the school in 98, and then I would go back home to visit, and we were always, especially after 2000 and the war in Iraq, had this idea that all Muslims are terrorists and they're out to get us. My reality was something very different. I lived in communities where they were primarily Muslim, but we had a Christian school, and everybody worked in peace together. So that was a whole, and got to see that in reality, the Muslims I knew, certainly the ones that were faithful, had a lot of commonality, had a lot of similarities between Christianity and Islam in terms of fasting and prayer and charitable works and doing good to others.
And so you, at that school, that you started to get to know the children, and you started to get to know the families.
And the teachers and the parents, right.
What were some of the experiences of the families at that time?
I guess I would say the same as, hospitality. Whether it was from Muslim or Christian, it was always come to the house. It ends with coffee. Start with tea, and then a meal, and then coffee, and just a warmth. And also the other thing too that I got from the very beginning, being someone who grew up in the United States, we fear death. We don't acknowledge the realities of life and death. Whereas there, someone dies and they're buried the next day, and everybody comes and offers their condolences or offers. So I think what it was is that I saw in the families both the hospitality and the great connection they had to each other, and warmth that was something far deeper and greater than I was familiar with in the United States.
And did you find that the Christians and Muslims all got along very
Yeah, absolutely.
well?
I mean, look, there's differences in terms of, yeah, they're all Palestinians. So they all live together, and yeah, that's what I would say for that. Yeah. And well, in our school, we had Muslim and Christian teachers, and they'd go out with each other. They're one and the same people, ultimately.
And in terms of just the spiritual life of the people, I think sometimes here in the States, Christians go to church on Sunday and then don't think about it much the rest of the week. And I found in other parts of the world that there's a much more integrated sense of a person's faith throughout their daily life. Was that what it was like in?
Yeah, I think that was the point I was trying to make about even acknowledging death. It's that life and death, everything is based on prayer. Unfortunately, I'm just not very good at languages, but I'm sure anyone who speaks Arabic here could tell you how many phrases that you have, whether you're a Muslim or Christian, that use the word for God, thanking God, remembering God, giving. And so it's just an innate part of life there, a recognition of God in your life. And the other sweet thing to me was where we lived in Al Azariya, it wasn't the total country, but like Rika, Jericho wasn't very far, where there was a lot of producing of the vegetables and things. So what was so wonderful to me was that every day you went to the market and you got whatever was grown that time. So there was a connectedness to nature, and if you're connected to nature, you're connected to the Creator, you're connected to God, and there was much more a sense of that in Palestinian life.
Okay. And how did the Israeli presence come into this experience?
Yeah. Okay, so I moved there in May of '96, and was basically in solitary and in the quiet of the convent for 2 years, and then September '98, went to the school. And let's put this in perspective. In November of '95, Yitzhak Rabin had been killed, assassinated, and I always like to bring that up too, but just to give a understanding of where we are today with Israel and Palestine. Rabin was killed by a Jewish zealot, and Netanyahu cheered on that zealot. And the people who are in his government now, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, some of the ministers, were very much of the thinking mindset of that religious zealot, Yigal Amir, I think was his name. I'm making that point because at that time, though, those kind of people were not a big part of Israeli society. There was very much a sense and a movement towards peace. The Oslo Accords had been put together, and there was, like where we live, there was an idea that we're going to become a Palestinian state. And so Israelis and Palestinians worked together. They weren't necessarily friends, but there was a sense that peace was in the air, and Israelis went to markets in Jericho and where we were in Al Azariya, and that all changed in 2000. So, but up to that point, there was an acknowledgement that we could live together on the land.
And was there a particular experience that you remember where you said things are changing on the ground here?
In a good way, you mean, or in a bad way?
In a bad
well,
way.
in a bad way, sure.
Yeah.
In a bad way, one of the first things was I began to understand that the Oslo Accords were a charade, because there was never a Palestinian state set up. So when they talk about how come the Palestinians aren't controlling their people, or how come they're doing this and that, and the government does, there was no Palestinian true government. They never said, this is Palestinian state, and here's your borders, and this is how you can conduct your economy and trade. It was area A, B, and C. And that became very real to me in May of 2000. I was at the school, I'm in Al Azariya, and Abu Dis, and Essaouira, we were area B. Area A meant that was the urban centers like Bethlehem, Ramallah, Hebron, Tulkarem, Jenin, where supposedly the Palestinians had autonomy, full civil control, police control, military control, though in reality that wasn't even the fact for them. But area B, where we lived, we had a mayor, but we didn't have real civil services. The police didn't have weapons. We didn't have a fire department. So it was sort of, and in and area C was 70% of the West Bank, which was still under Israeli military and civil control. Even that was supposed to be the state of Palestine. So May 2000, according to the Oslo Accords, our town was supposed to be elevated to Area A status. Ehud Barak was the prime minister at that time, and it was like, nope, Palestinians, you didn't prove yourself. You didn't have the conditions to be able to move in to become Area A. So for me, that was an idea, wait, what kind of game is this? That you're saying that they're a state, but really they have no control over anything. And at the same time, it was the reality of the settlements. At that time, the convent where I had started out on the Mount of Olives was less than 2 miles away from where the school was. You just walked over the Mount of Olives. In fact, in the early days, in the 30s and 40s, the abbess of the convent in Jerusalem used to ride a donkey and go down to the school. So it wasn't that far away. In 2000, the wall hadn't been built yet, but what was going on was beyond us, beyond Al-Azadiya to the east, Mali Adumim was one settlement. And when I was started there, it was very small, even still trailers on it. Now, if you go there, the Mali Adumim is like a huge city. And then there's continuous settlements, Kafar Adumim, Mitzpah Jericho, that go 20 miles all the way to the Jericho. So you had, not only were the Palestinians not seeing the conditions met that would allow them to move to sovereignty, full sovereignty and independence by by reneging on the Oslo Accord agreements, but they were continuing to build the settlements that were taking away their land. And then in September of 2000, Ariel Sharon went on the Temple Mount with nearly 1,000 people. He was an Israeli leader at the time. And so all that frustration that the Palestinians were experiencing, that lit the match and started the Intifada, started the resistance, physical resistance, violent resistance by the Palestinians, finally fed up by seeing that conditions weren't being met for them to achieve freedom. And then Israel retaliated by starting to build the wall. So I remember one day I was coming home from Jerusalem from the convent, it was August of 2001, and then there's these big cement cubes in the middle of the road. That's how, and then you couldn't get home from that road. And eventually that would become, they would dig up roads, and then they started digging the trenches, and within a year and a half, we had a 26-foot wall spanning right behind Lazarus's tomb, because Al-Azadiya is a corruption of Lazarus. So for any Christians, you know Mary and Martha and Lazarus, who lived in Bethany, which was Al-Azadiya. And so right next to the tomb, barely 100 feet away, it is now the wall separating Jerusalem from Bethany.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was the beginning.
Yeah.
And I could tell many more stories of the difficulty, how difficult it became to go to Ramallah, to pick up desks that we wanted for the school, or to Ram for books, and all of a sudden you have checkpoints and the road dug up.
What's it like to go through a checkpoint?
At times it can be not too bad, other times it's completely humiliating. I remember times being brought out of the car and you're made to spin around because are you carrying a bomb or something? But for me, I had advantages. I was a foreigner and we were a foreign church, so we had yellow license plates, right? We're aware that there is an apartheid system. And there, if you had the yellow plates, you can go on certain roads and you would find it easier to go through a checkpoint. Whereas if you were a Palestinian, didn't have Jerusalem ID or an Israeli citizen, you have green and white plates and you can't drive on certain roads. So I could get through a checkpoint, and I was a foreigner, so maybe wasn't treated as badly. And I'm talking about in the early 2000s. It's different today, but and could get through a checkpoint. So I remember one time I had friends in Bethlehem, and a woman, she had her daughter who was living in Jerusalem because she had married a Palestinian with a Jerusalem ID, and her daughter was going to give birth to her first child, and Nadia, the woman, was not allowed to go into Jerusalem, 7 miles away. So I went around and picked her up in Bethlehem, and because I was a nun, we were able to get through the checkpoint, and I was able to sort of smuggle her into Jerusalem so she could see her daughter. But the most painful thing for me was that I could get through. Oftentimes I would be on the road and I would see people I know having been pulled out of a shared taxi and having to stand in the hot sun for hours because soldiers decided we have to check them out, or they just wouldn't let them through the checkpoints to go through. And it's far worse now.
So would you say that is this Israel against Muslims, or is this Israel against Palestine? Mm-hmm. And I guess the root of my question, is this about religion or is this about land?
Yeah, it has nothing to do with, it doesn't have anything to do with religion in terms of being Muslim versus Jewish. First of all, I think a lot of you here recognize, but the reality is, where was Christ born? Who are the first Christians? And, I talk often to the young priest in Bethlehem, and he just doesn't know what to say because people have come up to him and they said, "So when did you convert to Christianity?" And his family has been Christian for centuries. So obviously Christians have always been on that land, and the Palestinians that live there today have roots that go back for centuries as being Christians. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the fact is that the conflict, if you want to call it a conflict, it's not a conflict. The reality is it's not a battle between Muslim and Jew. Muslims and Christians lived together on the land before 1948, and certainly 1800s and before then, Muslim, Jew, and Christian lived together there as well. I just finished reading, I finally got to it. I had a long flight from Australia. Avi Shleim was an Arab Jew who grew up in Iraq, and his family was forced to move from Iraq into Israel after 1948. So the reality is that Muslim, Jew, and Christian could live together. It was when you create the state of Israel, and then Israel, in order to sustain kind of their military state and the idea that they have to control everything, created this narrative that it was Muslim versus Jew, and that the Muslims were all of a jihadist or of a violent mindset, and they were out to get them. When the reality is that the state of Israel has been one that is only expansionist and wanting to create a land only for Jews.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So Muslim and Christian are treated the same.
Right.
They're all Palestinian,
Yes.
and they're all to be removed from the land.
Okay. And you've alluded already to, you were talking mostly about the beginning times. What's changed? How are things evolving today?
Yeah. So it only continued to get worse. You could say, so I was forced to leave in 2006. What happened is in April of 2005, I had gone to Washington, D.C., because some good Christian women in America recognized that their Orthodox and Catholic friends were being treated badly in Palestine. So they helped me to come to Washington, and I spoke about our situation, that I wasn't able to get to my convent in Jerusalem, that our teachers were suffering, that and that there wasn't this wall wasn't security that was separating us from Jerusalem, because I knew for a fact that it was separating Palestinian family from Palestinian family. So I got back from Washington, and my abbess called me in, and she said, Mordecai Levy was here from the Jerusalem mayor's office, and he asked, what was Mother Agapia doing in Washington? And she said, don't worry, she won't be at the school anymore. So it was a way to silence me. And soon after that, I left, and I went back into a community in New York. But every year since 2009, I've taken pilgrims back to the Holy Land. So I was well aware of how the situation was changing on the ground. Most years, even though the situation from 2009 till 2023, of course, the situation in Gaza was always horrific. The continual bombing there every few years and the wars. The West Bank, it was relatively stable, but it was sort of like, I would think of it with my friends in Bethlehem, it's sort of like life in a gilded cage, because it's like a silent killer, because the settlements were continued to be built. Land was still being lost, confiscated, so the Palestinians couldn't live on that. But you sort of had, in certain urban areas, you could live within there. So that's why I call it a gilded cage. You're in a prison, but your life wasn't too bad. But since 2023, for sure, continual raids within the urban centers, more checkpoints. So now it's near, like, for example, I visited in September, and Bethany, where I lived, we were able to get in fairly quickly. And then it's like noon, and we're leaving the school, and it's only like a mile down the road to get on the highway that takes you back to Jerusalem, and if you're lucky enough to be able to use that highway. And we had to wait for 2 hours. I was up in the north, and we tried to come down, and in America, we have the traffic helicopters telling you what the traffic conditions are. There, every taxi driver had a WhatsApp connection, because you didn't know there's soldiers here or they've put a checkpoint there. So mobility has become even harder, and the intensity of the violence of the settlers has become greater. I was in the Christian village of Taiba, where I saw the burned cars and saw the graffiti on the wall, which was saying, "You're going to regret this." And they had the name of, pronunciation is bad, but Mugahir. It was the village where Saif Musalat, a 20-year-old American citizen, was killed during this summer. So the settlers are everywhere. And the reality, and I'm sure many of you know that too, when people tried to go pick their olives in the fall, you could be confronted by armed settlers. And if you try to protect yourself or to go and try to pick your olives, the Israeli soldiers are going to be there, and you're the one that's going to be detained, not the Yara. So it's become more violent. And before, I wouldn't have said in the early 2000s that they targeted Christians rather than Muslims. There wasn't a distinction. You were a Palestinian. But in 2024, I also visited in September, and I was picked up by a priest coming from Jordan into Palestine, and we were going through a checkpoint in the northern West Bank. He was a big fellow, and he had a big cross on him, and the soldier started flipping his cross, which you never would have seen anything like that before. And then this year, I was sitting having coffee with a number of women from Bet Jala, friends of friends, and they're all discussing what happened to them at the checkpoint and how they were the provocation of the soldiers. And one story stood out in particular. It was an Orthodox Christian family. They had driven through Wadi Nar, the Valley of Fire, because Palestinians can't use the major highways to get from Bethlehem through the West Bank to another town. You have to use long, curvy, mountainous roads that can be dangerous to drive on, plus you have to go through checkpoints. So they had gotten to Jericho for the day. It was a husband and wife and their young children. They're coming back home through Wadi Nar, and they get stopped at the checkpoint, and the soldier stops them, and they thought they're able to go, and they says, "Wait a second." Said, "Give me your crosses, give me the icons, religious pictures on your dashboard, and now give me a piece of tissue paper." She wraps them up and throws them in the garbage. And the wife started yelling, and the husband said, "Stop." Because the reality of the situation as well is, most likely they wouldn't have hit or attacked a woman, but if the man had spoken up, for sure he would have been pulled out of that car, detained, maybe beaten, or even shot. That's just the reality. In fact, I was really shocked. You had Mitri Rahab there, Pastor Mitri. I was with him and Pastor Munther Isaac this November. And so we were at in Hungary, a group discussing the Palestinian situation with people in the Hungarian government. And we spent a lot of time together. And I was really shaken because Munther, who's a 45-year-old man, a pastor, a well-known figure now, he has just been transferred to Ramallah, to a parish there, and he does not have the right to drive into Jerusalem and on to Bethlehem. But he said, "You know what? And I don't even want to, because I'm afraid what they do," and this happened to me a number of times, you're driving your car to the checkpoint, and the soldiers play a game. It's like you don't know, are they telling you you can move, or that they're telling you to stop? And if you get the signal wrong, you could be shot. And he really expressed that fear, and it just shook me that someone of that caliber even has to think that way. Yeah.
Do you see a connection between what's happening in Israel and what's happening in the United States, and maybe even what's happening in other places around the world where authoritarianism is on the rise?
Yeah, I don't know that I can speak to the rest of the world, but I can certainly speak to what's going on with ICE now and the situation. And it's something that it's becoming blatant now, but it's something I was thinking about even a few years ago, because the connection between, you saw the increased militarization of the police in the United States and how they're armed. And the reality is that many police forces now have been trained by Israeli defense forces. So instead of being true law enforcement and taking care of the safety of our people, instead it's the mentality of crush them. And you're seeing the tactics that they're using are similar to what we lived through on the West Bank.
Yeah.
Shoot first and ask questions later. Everybody is the enemy. And just reacting with violence instead of trying to I was with a family friend last night, and her husband has been in security for a long time, high-level security, and he verified for me that when he was in the police department, has had training in Israel as well. But he said, as a law enforcement officer, our job is to de-escalate a situation. But what you learn from the Israelis is just the opposite.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's what we see.
And that's what we're seeing now. I mean, it was horrifying to see what happened in Minneapolis, but it's what I've seen on the West Bank many times.
Right. Yeah. So what needs to change in the United States? What do people need to know, and what do people need to do to start to make change?
Well, I think we're beginning to see it in that because people like a Tucker Carlson, I think, and it's critical, you know, as a progressive, you might think, well, we've been fighting on this issue for a long time and speaking up. But if you have to reach that everybody gets the message. So I think the only hopeful thing I can say right now is that people on the right are beginning to understand, maybe for different reasons. Maybe it's the fact, a financial thing. Why are we spending all this money for a country that's not doing anything to help us, that's not promoting our conservative Christian values? So this leaves me hopeful that we just have to keep putting our foot to the pedal, that don't give up hope now. Those that have been working on the issue don't think that this can never, that it's hopeless. There shouldn't be anything. First of all, we have all the people that are suffering there now. My fear is that because even though the situation is still horrific in Gaza, you know, I've become friends now with Mossab Abu Tocha, the poet, and he's chronicling every day what is happening in Gaza. And just an hour before I came here, he's writing how a 2-month-old in Zaytun, the neighborhood where St. Porphyrius Orthodox Church is, was just killed. So and there were a number of others that were killed as well. So they're not just still looking after young men who are militants or anything like that. They're killing children. And so that's going on there. But it's not at the level it was months ago. So most of the world turns away. It's no longer a story, right? And like I said, the silent killer analogy that I use, West Bank, they're strangling the people. It's a slow death that is going on, and it's not ending. So we have to keep realizing the work that the people are doing to say that to our congresspeople, we don't want our money going there. We don't want our city putting money into bonds for Israel. This all has to continue. Yeah. And I think the change can be made. You know, I was just down in Australia, and they're going through the same thing. Threats on people who speak out on Palestine being brought to court. But they're protesting and doing things. And I met one woman, Areem Burrows, who's originally from Haifa, lives in Australia now, and she wrote a book, and she's a young person, but her argument was that in general, it's sort of like a tipping point argument. If you get 5% of people to change their mind, that changes actions that are taking place. So even though it looks like we're still small, keep doing it, and there is that level of change happening in all spheres of American society. And you see it with the congressmen and the senators even beginning to say, oh, no, I don't take AIPAC money and things. So the pressure is beginning to be felt. Yeah. And we have to inspire new people to run for office that are going to be against the policies of ICE and are going to be against us supporting in Israel the way that we do today.
Yeah. And as a Christian, I would think, do we, because Christian nationalism and Christian Zionism is a real thing, and Jewish Zionism is a real thing in these states that's supporting all of this, do we as progressive Christians or justice-oriented Christians and justice and progressive-oriented Jews, do we have a special responsibility to speak to our people about what's happening?
Of course, obviously. Yeah. I mean, you know, those who are on the progressive end of the spectrum of Christianity, there's that natural affinity, the natural sense of speaking out for social justice and things. I would consider myself a more conservative Christian, but it's to our greater shame. The Christians of Palestine are Orthodox and Catholic for the most part, the most traditional of the Christians, and who've been the most reluctant to speak out. And so I would throw out a challenge to the traditional Christians in America that this is your people that are suffering, and this is your legacy. This is where the Christ that you believe in lived and evangelized, did his miracles. This is a place we should honor and treasure, and that we have over the centuries. It's always been a practice of Christianity to go on pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and now we're allowing those places to be taken over. Yeah. And so that we, you know, just like and unfortunately, the mainstream media keeps it quiet. But I went to one of the first demonstrations in D.C. after October 7th. It was about the 15th or something. About 1,500 people, and we marched towards the Rayburn Building, Cannon Building, I think. And it's getting to dusk, and there are about 1,500 people chanting there. And then I see we're all waiting. And I said, what are we waiting for? There were 500 Jewish Voice for Peace people inside peacefully protesting and allowing themselves to be arrested. But we don't hear about that. So the Jewish Voice for Peace and not in our name, Christians have to take the same tack, not in our name, to allow this continue to happen. Yeah.
I don't think I looked at my questions. Is there anything to end the interview portion of the evening that you'd like to say that we really need to know or you haven't said yet?
Well, yeah, I think the main thing is, like, the 2 points I really would want to make is that we can't give up hope, because my sense is that most in the audience here have a pretty good handle on what is happening. But also to realize that, we just can't take our attention off it, and that it's happening so quickly what they're doing on the ground. It's almost like I can't catch my breath each day. In Shepherd's, like, I'm planning to take a pilgrimage. I take pilgrimage of young people in late June, early July. What's going to be left? In Shepherd's Field, where we go, next to Bethlehem, they've just confiscated more land that should have been used for a hospital for the community. Bet Sahur as well is a primarily Christian town still. And they've just taken the land from the people. And you don't hear about that in the news. So just that we just have to keep working on things and realizing, again, maybe the only hopeful thing of that is that I think the Israelis realize that this is sort of, the tide is turning against them. So they're trying quickly to move on things. To what end? And also I would leave, maybe it sounds like I'm too negative about Israel, and it's not that. You know, when I was at the school, we had, because I was part of the Russian Orthodox Church, we had Russian girls as well, families, Russian Jews who emigrated to Israel, but a lot of them actually had Orthodox Christian roots. So we had girls who lived in Haifa, who lived in Tel Aviv. And what I see is Israel is like a Sparta state. It's so militarized and so fearful, and it's not healthy for the people there. And so if someone really believes in Israel, is what their government doing now good for the future of Israel? Or isn't it better to learn how to live in peace with everybody and work towards that?
Amen.
That's it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your testimony, your witness, your clarity. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And so now we are entering the Q&A. Is there anyone who has a question? And then also online, Karen will take it in writing any questions that we will read out. Is anybody? I'm wearing my running shoes. Oh, that's hilarious. So I have a question.
Okay.
We saw where Netanyahu and the government brought in a lot of evangelical pastors and priests to come and do kind of a propaganda thing. And I don't know, and also the data fencing that's happening around, is that what it's called? Yeah, around all these churches. And I don't know if you know about that, but these evangelical churches in California, Arizona, Colorado, and Texas.
Was it Texas or Nevada?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And where it seems that Israel's terrified of losing the Christians. And so the data fencing is where when people go in, it grabs their phone and then it sends them all this propaganda, right? But when you were in occupied Palestine, did you see like a lot of that kind of tours of evangelicals, and did you see that kind of propaganda machine happening when you were there?
During my years there, right now there's very little on either side, very few people going. But certainly over the decades that I've been there, it was actually very dismissed. Sometimes the most painful thing would be I'd be at a checkpoint and I'd see an American, probably it was a vet, and he'd be chatting away with the soldier at the checkpoint. So as that they were in communion with each other, connected. Or the great frustration when you're in the northern West Bank and you see the settlement of Ariel, which now has a university growing and growing, and then I find out that it's a guy from Texas and evangelicals from there that are giving the money to go. It's a completely different, they see two worlds, right? They generally, a group, if they go to the West Bank, they're taken in the buses and they're not going to see the Palestinians. And that's something that's really important. And what I try to do in my pilgrimages and what we need to do, probably, if any of you recall when Ta-Nehisi Coates went to the West Bank because he was invited by a writers group, that's what we all have to do. But you have to go, and you have to go with people who can make you see. Because when someone goes on a pilgrimage, they go, it's overwhelming, and they're just quickly going to the holy sites. And like I always think about it when I'm driving from the airport and bringing people to Jerusalem, you go on that highway, it looks like a highway. A person who's there for the first time doesn't recognize that on the side of Road 443 going down the road are big cement cubes, and behind those cubes are Palestinians living basically in prison. So you unless someone points that out to you, you have no clue what's going on. So these evangelicals go on these tours, and it's not just the pastors. I live up near Cornell, near Ithaca, and I had a young law student goes to our church, and he says, "Hey, Mother Agapia, you know what?" And this was like 2 days before spring break. "I just got word that all the law students, we've got a free trip to Tel Aviv." And then I said, "And show me your itinerary." It was like a week before, and it was basically to go down to the Gaza border, to go to the Wadi Yeshem, to go to basically to get indoctrinated. And so they not only with the evangelicals, but with all spheres of society, anybody who think that there's going to be of influence, they have to try to propagandize and get onto their side. And unless you come on pilgrimages or with people that can have you come and see the Palestinians, which they make that hard to do, then it doesn't happen. But I think again, the hopeful thing is, why is Israel putting millions of dollars to try to convince their Christian evangelical base to continue to support them unless it's beginning to get through that there's a problem? And I'll put, there's a group, telosgroup.com. They work for bringing people to Israel and Palestine. And there's groups like that that are trying to reach to evangelicals as well and let them know to understand, as a Christian, does your belief system allow you to allow for the genocide and ethnic cleansing of Christian people? Yeah.
Yeah, thank
and
you.
of people.
We have a question over here.
Assalamu alaikum. So I'm Muslim, and as a Muslim living here in America, one of the things that really I've wondered a lot about, and I think if you could speak a bit about it with respect to the similarities that you've kind of felt. But one thing I've really felt, like you mentioned, you went to the protests, you see, a lot of Jews come out and really speak out against this very strongly. And there's definitely you don't see Christian groups in any of these types of things. And from our perspective as a Muslim, it's like, we don't understand this. We love Jesus.
Right.
We believe he's alive. We believe he's going to return. And when he does, we're going to follow him. We love Mary. We believe in the virgin birth of Mary. We have so many similarities. Yet all we hear about is Judeo-Christian values, etc. And it's just like, hey, what about us? Hello? We actually believe in Jesus. We love him.
Yeah.
We're required to love him. So, it's kind of like, for us, a bit baffling. And we don't know what to do about it. And we want to find a way to kind of bridge this. But also, I don't know, maybe I don't know who can help. If maybe someone like yourself, obviously you're doing a lot. But how can we get that message through of, you know what, we're pretty similar here, and we're on the same side because we're on the side of justice, we're on the side of Jesus, right? As far as Muslims are concerned, we try to pray as Jesus prayed. We might have theological differences, obviously, but we're also praying to the Father, right? So, as Jesus did. So, I know there's differences, but so much in common, and I'm wondering how we could bridge this.
Well, I think we just have to keep speaking out on it. One of the most, I had no idea when, before the Tucker Carlson thing, which I was very reluctant, he wasn't in my in my sphere of people that I was on a list to talk to or to see. But after the interview, I happened to be in Istanbul and in Jordan and Palestine, at least 5 or 6 times a day. It was Muslim men coming up to me and saying thank you and wanting a picture and things. And so I think we just have to keep getting, keep talking about it and saying, recognizing to challenge that narrative. And it just, the problem is it's so difficult. You had the shooting in Australia in Bondi, and what were the words that come out? Even though it was the guys were supposedly affiliated with ISIS, whatever that means, and then they used the words Hamas and Hezbollah. So it's so pounded into by the news media that that's what it is. These Muslims are like this. So all we can do is just keep challenging it and tell the story that it's not like that. I've been to Syria, I've been to Lebanon, and every place I went to big, important Christian religious sites, I saw Muslims without fail there. In Sadanaya, outside Damascus, praying to the Mother of God and honoring the Mother of God. And it's not uncommon to be in the Holy Sepulchre and the Church of Nativity and see Muslims there as out of respect, not to do anything. And one of the great joys this time since after the interview is that I've met many people, many Muslim young men, and we've had some very deep conversations about our theology and what we believe. And so, so those basic precepts are there, right? Like I said, of fasting and prayer and charitable works, but also even the deeper understanding of who's Jesus and what's God. It's all there. And it's a shame that that the world doesn't see that. All I can do, we just have to keep, whoever you are, wherever you are, you witness to that.
Thank you.
I would add to that I think I think there are a lot of Christians who are very, very aware of, they're woke enough to be aware that Christianity has been anti-Semitic for most of its history. And they don't want to be anti-Semitic. They want to try to correct that. And so I think that those of us who are awake to what's happening in Palestine just need to claim over and over again and be very clear that criticizing Israel is not anti-Semitic.
Good point.
We have a question here.
Yes, my name's Lanny, and I was actually raised a Zionist Christian. And I keep on saying it was like I was born blind. Mm-hmm. And I tell the story of when I first heard about Shireen Abu Akleh and how she was murdered. And it was at that point when I learned about it that everything I thought I knew was wrong. My government didn't respond because she was an American. The press, where was the press? She was the press. And they have all of this on video. She was a Christian. Where was the church? Everything I thought and forgive me, but the IDF, I thought they were there to make things better. And they shot her. So you understand. I was fully indoctrinated. But these are my people who are still as I was. And this is who breaks my heart, the people who still believed like I did. And it's so hard to wake them up because what do we do about the messaging? We have no press. Where do we start? How do we get into the churches? How do we overcome this?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a big challenge, and it's I don't know how far I want to go with this. Particularly painful for myself because I have family members that are high up in the mainstream media. And I guess I've come to the conclusion that they aren't going to change. So we have to look for the alternatives. And there are alternatives out there in the news, and especially the helpful thing, again, is that with young people, they've turned away from the mainstream media. So there's other voices out there. I find it very intriguing. You said you were triggered, in a sense, changed because of what happened to Shireen Abu Akleh. And I just want to mention about that because I actually didn't know much about her before she was shot. I didn't watch the news, but the day she was shot, my phone blew up. Everybody I knew, Muslim and Christian, was in tears and just in shock. And every day, every time I go back, 3 kilometers from where she was shot in the Jenin refugee camp is the church of the 10 lepers, where Christ healed the lepers, only 3 kilometers away. And I would always go to the location when I go on pilgrimage because there would be flowers and posters marking it. When we went, I only wanted to illustrate how bad things have gotten and what we don't hear in the news. When I went there this year in September, Israel has started a campaign of wiping out the refugee camps. So in Jenin and Tulkarm, to a little bit to the northwest, 40,000 people are no longer in their homes. And part of that area is the area where she was shot. And when we tried to get close to the area, there were Palestinians there. It was about 3 PM, and there were little kids. And they said, don't go any further because the Israelis are there. And 2 young boys had been shot during that week because they tried to go home to their homes in the camps, which are apartment buildings and things, to get belongings, and the Israelis shot them dead. So we couldn't even get, I took a photograph, which I thought was the area, but honestly, I couldn't tell you if it is because because they've destroyed the road and knocked down buildings and things. But as to point, why the media doesn't do anything and what can we do? All I can say is turn to the alternative media because we're not getting the message from the others. Yeah, and you know the story now. Actually, I would want to ask you a question. You changed your mind, because I get this question from people. What do I say to a Christian Zionist? And my answer is usually there's a certain level of people that it's kind of delusion. We call it prelest in Orthodox, that they're so blinded, whatever you say isn't going to get through. But other people, if you are a Christian at heart, how can you allow these things to go on in Christ's name? So I'm just interested to see what you have to say.
Yeah, actually, I wrote a book called Learning to Listen to Palestine.
Okay.
And what changed me was, first of all, the confusion. I was confused by what I read about Shireen Abu Akleh. And so that's the first crack. And you need to get there. You need to get people confused.
Yeah.
But then I just went into the teachings of Jesus. It's the teachings of Jesus. You can't, none of Zionism stands up to the teachings of Jesus, but we have to start exposing Zionism and say, this is what's happening and this is what we believe. This is what's happening and this is what we believe. So it's not a difficult message at all. We know this message. But it seems like so much of the church, especially the evangelical church, has forgotten the teachings of Jesus because they're more inclined towards the fear of dispensationalism. And I think that's one of our big problems is rather than looking at the love of Jesus and how Jesus tells us over and over, do not fear, we fear all of this end time stuff that is mostly, I think, delusion because it doesn't follow the teachings of Jesus.
And as a Christian, very good. For a Christian, we should just focus on our own end. And so think about the life we should lead, right? Not any kind of prophecies and things. Yeah. Thank you.
So we have one more question here.
It's really an honor to meet you tonight. Thank you for being with us. I am probably the oldest person here tonight. You don't know that, but I don't look it, but I'm very old. I have witnessed 1948. I was there. I witnessed 1948. I was in Gaza 1950 and 51. And I witnessed the tragedy. Now, what can we do as Americans? To answer your question. For the last 25 years, I have been chairing the annual Middle Eastern cultural celebration at my college. I want to teach the American about the beautiful culture of the Middle East, history, culture. And the college sponsored all the events annually. I invited poets, artists, calligraphers, historians, you name it. Even Nabila Mango came to my school several times. So this is my part, as I am a teacher. I taught chemistry for 50 years. I love chemistry and history as well. So here it is. We can do a lot if we have the opportunity to teach the Americans about the great culture of the Middle East. I was born in Alexandria, Egypt. My mom, God bless her, told me, Sammy, her name is Sammy, the Muslims worship the Father. The Christian worship the Son. We're all good. You see, that's true. So I keep my country very welcoming as Egypt. So my point is, we can do more if we just have the opportunity to teach Americans. Thank you for listening.
I just want to say one thing is I keep forgetting is that, you're right. I've been in Washington now, and I was there recently, and I was very impressed there was a Muslim organization, and they had gathered young people from all around the country. They had a weekend events where they educated them on what was going on. They had speakers, guys from Gaza, the uncle of Saif Musalat, and then the next day, Monday and Tuesday, they went on the Hill and they trained people how you go and talk to your congressman. So that's what Christians have to do. We have some small groups. There's been some witness. I'll just make a pitch for Josh Paul and Tariq Kabash, because to me they seem to be advocates that know what they're doing and have the ability to, because the change has to come from the United States. Every other country in the world can say this is wrong, this is a genocide, but the only lever for change is from America, with the dollars and the diplomatic support changing that. So in order to change that, if you're a person of prayer, you use prayer and you fast and you pray that the rulers changed in their hearts. But also as Christians, there's nothing wrong with advocating. There was just a gospel. We read the gospel every day. We have ones, and it was about the fig tree, where the apostles go to the fig tree, and then they're walking through, and then the next segment is about Christ casting out the money changers, an act of righteousness and speaking out against those that are doing wrong. And then they come and see the fig tree again, and it is withered. And that actually is a reference to those who did not accept the Messiah, and the fruit withered, because they wouldn't see the continuation of the truth of God going in. And then that segment actually ends, the gospel commentary, with faith you can move a mountain. So there's always hope in that, and we have to, as Christians, advocate and speak out for righteousness, not only here in America and justice, but that our name and our monies are not being used for injustice. So those are Christian acts, and we need to have Christians, not in our name organizations, continue to grow and act to change the political atmosphere as well.
Okay, we have a couple more questions over here. I also want to mention that there is a group of churches in the Bay Area where we're starting Christians for Palestine.
Excellent.
So
Good.
Hi there. Growing up in the Orthodox Church, we often were thinking, oh, Zionism is more of a evangelical problem. It's like a Western church problem. But then, especially from 2023 and on, we're starting to see like Methodist churches, Presbyterian churches, everyone start to speak up. We even saw the Pope Francis and followed by Pope Leo both speak up. But we're not seeing anything from the Orthodox leaders. And when you read scripture, as the woman over there was mentioning, all of the passages where, we see the Good Samaritan who helped while the priest walked by, or when Jesus talks about, if you did not feed me or clothe me, or those who would lead their people astray would have like a millstone hung from their neck. You see all of these passages about, how it's our duty to do something. So what is going on with the Orthodox leadership? Is it cowardice? Is it just are they no longer following the faith, or what do you think that the Orthodox people can do to convince their leadership to actually do something?
Right. It's a very important but a very sad question, as being an Orthodox Christian, is that, point of fact, the Orthodox bishops have not spoken out very much in this country at all. I can't speak to their reasons for it, but my answer to you would be, rather than worry about what they're saying or not saying, is the changes with us. If you know that there's a problem, you know now, I've been blocked to speak at some Orthodox churches. They use an excuse that are not in their jurisdiction or whatever, but I think it really is that some people are fearful of stepping out from what the line that you're supposed to have. But we shouldn't worry about that. I was with a wonderful priest on the East Coast who does wonderful work both within the inner city, health clinics and helping the local poor, but also speaking out on Palestine. And he says, you know what? And he's a very peaceful man. He said, don't worry about what they're saying or doing or not doing. What are you going to do? So I would make a challenge to I've met young people as I've gone around the country in the Orthodox Church, and I say, you be the network. Start building yourself up. You be the one to educate yourself and challenge your priests. Tell them, we want to hear about what's going on to our brothers and sisters in Palestine and speak about it. And do something. Go and advocate. And I'm happy to create a network of young people in the Orthodox churches around the country or to join with the other Christian groups. And so don't wait for them. You be the change. That would be my answer. Yes.
Hi, Mother Agapia. I'm very honored to be in the same room as you, so I really appreciate you being here. Thank you. I am affiliated with an organization that you probably know, Sabeel, in East Jerusalem.
Yep.
So I'm on the board that helps them, supports them. FASNA?
Yeah. Sure. Jonathan.
Yes,
Yeah.
Jonathan.
He was my lawyer in Jerusalem.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
A long time ago, yeah.
Actually, I'm trying to get him connected to Josh Paul. I'm trying to get
I can do it. Yeah.
Oh, good. Please do that. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we try to really strongly encourage is people to go to visit.
Yeah, you have the pilgrimages, the group travel.
So I just kind of wanted to put a plug in there for Sabeel and FASNA and Friends of Sabeel, because I'm working with another person on the board to put together a women-only trip.
Excellent.
In October.
Do you have information in the back or a way people can reach it? Well, FASNA, is it FASNA.org?
FASNA, yes.
FOSNA.org. You'll find out information about taking trips to Palestine.
And I'm on the website so people can reach out to me. But I guess question would be then, do you encourage people to go?
Absolutely.
Yes. I thought you would say that.
No, I work within my own church and it's just word of mouth. Since 2009, twice a year I would take groups to Palestine, primarily a religious pilgrimage, but I make a point of them meeting the local communities and we discuss at some level. We don't make it a political trip, but just to let them know this is the situation and to be aware of it and to make it's so important. You think it's something small, and that's I even say to the last questioner out there, is that even doing things like as a Christian, reaching out, to making sister communities with the Christians over there and linking, that gives such a support to the people there. So it starts with that, with getting to know the other. Yeah. So I do it all the time and encourage it. And God willing, in June, July, I'll have a couple trips there. Yeah.
Awesome. We have another couple questions.
Oh, come and see. That's the way to do it. Yeah.
Hi. I just have a quick comment question, maybe more for Pastor Tom. I'm Catholic. I was raised Catholic, and you learn about Jesus, Bethlehem, all that. About 20 years ago, when I met my best friend's boyfriend, now husband, and he told me he was from Nazareth, the first thing that popped in my head was, oh, Jesus of Nazareth? And it was the first time, seriously, that it actually kind of took a place and put it on the planet. And that's kind of when the light bulb went on a bit, that there's this holy land that's holy to Catholics, to Muslims, to Jews. But I feel like in the church, they never put that into context. So when you talk about Jesus and, Jerusalem and stuff, do you say like in Palestine, or is it just these biblical places? Like I felt like when I think back, there was no context of like it actually being a physical place.
Yeah, I mean, here we do try to be historically accurate about when the Bible was written and what was happening there and the geography. I'm a little hesitant to talk too much about the Holy Land, because I think if we get into this mindset that land is ours because our religious people were there at some point in history, then we're never going to find any peace with each other. But I know there's a lot of people who that's a very meaningful connection to their faith and to the land, because land matters, right? And so I think it's a balance. But I mean, all land is holy, and we all have to share this planet together. But yeah, I think we have to honor where our traditions came from, and the connections that people feel to that.
Yeah, so I go to a small church in Sunnyvale, and I've been trying to educate my congregation. It's been very hard. It's hard to talk about this stuff, and it's hard to be like the only one bringing it up all the time. But I did hold an educational session at my church, and later when the congregants, and I asked them what they thought, and one of them told me that it was the first time she had heard the term Nakba, and she was really struggling. I mean, like, it's not their fault, you know, it's our whole media education system. It's really difficult. But my associate pastor said something to me a few weeks ago. I mentioned something that had happened, and she said, but like, what can we do? And I was just flabbergasted. It was like, I feel like we can speak up. There are things that we can do. You mentioned like establishing relationships with like a sister congregation or neighborhood or something. But are there other things other than what any American should be doing that you think would be particularly helpful for church people to be doing, just to, you know, on the issue of Palestine?
I mean, one of the strongest words for a Christian is the word martyr, the martyria, which means witness in Greek. And so as a Christian, if you know what's going on, then it's your responsibility to witness, right? So, and we shouldn't be afraid. You reach out to the one person you know and to the next person you know. And then also I was thinking, this is speaking more to conservative Christians. I know, well, I'm conservative part of the church. They have no problem for marching on Washington for a March for Life rally, right? Why not those same Christians reach out to them and say, let's go stand with pictures of children from Gaza? Do they not have a right to life too? And we should be caring about them, and our dollars being used to kill them. So there's steps that whatever walk of life you're in, you use that to witness and to speak, and don't be cowed by it. Because I think there is a cost for people in America, right? You may have your job, and if you're wearing a keffiyeh or if you say Free Palestine, you might be challenged. But that's where martyric Christianity comes in. So we're not being shot for our faith, but maybe you're going to suffer a little bit for it. So don't be afraid to do that. And whatever is at your hand to do, do. And that will build on it.
Yeah, and find some co-conspirators in your church.
Yeah.
You know, find a couple, one other person, and then find one other person. And if you can make a committee, then you can go back to your associate pastor and say, hey, we want to have the Palestine committee. And we want to advocate for what we've witnessed, and we want to testify.
You know, I think too, it would be great to really, the connection is there, but it has to be built stronger within the Black community. Think of the civil rights movement. Who were those guys that were staying at the Woolworth and were doing the first acts to combat racism and segregation, right? So every movement for peace and justice starts small, but it builds with people who are willing to take those steps. So don't ever think what you're doing isn't enough or it's too hard to do. If it's the right thing to do, then do it in the name of Christ.
Hi, I'm Lama. I'm actually a pediatrician and I do research on anti-Palestinian racism. And one of the things that we noted is that non-Palestinian allies are also impacted by anti-Palestinian racism, and they often feel isolation and fear and don't know who to turn to and don't really recognize what they're feeling in terms of mental and physical health trauma. And I really appreciate a lot of your suggestions around finding other people to talk to, because actually you're not alone. And that's super important to recognize, because the goal of the racism is to make you feel alone. Right? It's to erase Palestinian history narratives and make you feel like you're all by yourself, so you're too afraid to stand up. And I really appreciate what you said about standing up, but there are some of us who maybe don't have the personality or ability to stand up the way others do. And I would wonder, what your advice is to those who can't do it the way perhaps you've done it. Thank you.
Well, yeah, but that's what I mean, is everybody has different talents, has different abilities. And so for one who doesn't feel confident to be able to speak out, or, it's the circumstances that bring you to a situation. So that means that you go in your corner and you pray that things change. Or you write an email to your congressman. That can be the least threatening thing of all, right? So there's some element, something that each person can do that fits in with their abilities. But I also want to make, to what the person about Shireen Abu Akleh and yourself, I've had a few situations now. I've been kind of flabbergasted. I was at some Orthodox churches before I was banned, and it was a captive audience, and I was shocked how many of these Orthodox Christians didn't know about the attack on the St. Porphyrius Orthodox Church. Because if you're sort of enmeshed in the issue, you think people have seen the news and know it. So what you think might be a small thing to do, just by just saying a story of what you heard, might be the thing that's going to trigger the change in someone else. So don't even think that or don't be afraid of it. Because I think people, give them the benefit of the doubt. A lot of people simply just don't know. So if you, in a calm way, not a defensive way or an aggressive way, say, hey, do you know what's going on in the land where Jesus was? Or with my friend in Gaza? Or I heard this story about a Christians in Gaza, or a Muslim, of the situation. Just witness to that, and you'll be amazed that some people, if you approach it as a story, as a person to person, it can make a change in people. Yeah.
So I just want to check in with you, Mother Agapia. Can you take a few more questions?
I'm happy to. Where's my driver?
This is just a comment. The standard of Jewish Voice for Peace is all land is holy, all people are chosen. And 4 days a week, there's a Zoom call at noon, and the first thing you start with after the introduction is, where are you emotionally today? And it's very supportive for people to say, because you're not the Lone Ranger when you're disgusted, tired, da-da-da. There's also out on the table a list of things you can do now, and they're all call your Congress character, send the email. So they're out there if anybody wishes an activity on the internet, it's easy to do.
Thank you.
Hi, it has been a very interesting discussion. So many great ideas have been suggested. And the importance also that different religions, the Christian faith, the Muslim faith, even the Jewish faith, can everybody contribute. My point is to focus on something that I feel is very important at the end of this whole thing, which is to have peace. How could it be accomplished? We know that the two-state solution have been proposed, and there is a good number of people. Countries in the world and even in Palestine and Israel itself who are for it. And we don't have any doubt that the Palestinian people would like to have their own country, and they deserve it, and it's their right. And from what we have been seeing on the news, when there were demonstrations in Israel, the Jewish people were demonstrating, and a good number have been expressing their interest that for peace, they should live together with the Arabs and create an environment where trust in each other and support each other, and two-state solution will be the way to go. Now, my question to you, how strong is this movement? The movement to have a two-state solution, the movement for the percentage of the Jewish population who is supporting peace. Are they like the young only? Because at one time you mentioned the young generation is looking for a change. How about also the mature generation, all age group? What does it look like? Because there is one thing, everybody on the outside could influence them, and we can all from here, we can all tell them, we are helping you, we are sending good thoughts and all of that. If the people over there don't accept it and don't want to live together or are not supporting each other, it will not work. So what do you see so far when you are there? Do you see that this peace movement is getting better, or has there been a resistance against it?
Yeah, I think I said in the beginning how it's changed from 1998 till now. And sadly, the Israeli policy of the government, for the most part, of the leaders, has been to make this bargain with the religious zealots and the people that used to be a minority, but now are very nationalistic, fascistic, and only see one solution that doesn't include other people. So that's not a very hopeful statement. And I'm not a politician, so I don't think it's really for me to say whether eventually it'll be a one-state or a two-state. But what I always like to get back to is that at its root, it's not a complicated problem. It's not complex. The reality is that, maybe that's even going too far for people who have lost their homes in 1948, but let's say from 67, there was a state of Israel. Instead of staying within their border, they've continued the expansion. The uncomplicated way to look at it is that it's the responsibility, primarily of the United States, that's allowed them to continue that expansion, and has not brought peace for anybody in that land. So the first step is to step away from only supporting one side and pushing and creating only an atmosphere of violence and of hate of one another. Creating that's what you do when you continue to take people's land. The reality on the ground right now is not one that anybody who's been there would understand. You can say two states, but it doesn't mean anything, okay? So again, I don't want to advocate whether it's one state or two state. What we have to do, if you want the conditions for peace, you have to remove those levers that are creating the conditions of violence and war. And that comes from the United States. And then secondly, then when you get to the point of where the people can begin to have some trust in one another again and begin to talk, they'll work it out. And I'll only say is that, well, I'll leave it at that, because there's some people who will tell you that, like in people used to live in the Middle East, Muslim, Jew, and Christian, under all sorts of different empires and occupations, and all could live together. So maybe the ultimate solution, if you really want peace for that area of the world, is something where it's not one state or two state, it's all living together in peace. That is, if you were to ask me today what the reality of a situation would be, that would be the one that has to be worked towards.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you to the church for hosting this amazing function. As someone from Gaza, I recognize that the issue here is obviously not religious-based. It's Zionism, and Zionism doesn't have a religion.
Right.
Zionism is ideology, right?
Yep.
And something that we haven't heard here, and as a Muslim, have no issue sharing, there's also Muslim Zionists, right? And many of them actually tend to be leaders of many Arab countries, and especially the UAE. So I do want to recognize that this is a shared challenge across all three of our faiths, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Now, one thing about Zionism and about this fight, it's about the fight between truth and falsehood. It's the fight between freedom and subjugation. And the people of Palestine, they are an example, maybe the example of this, but we see this across the world. We see Christians being subjugated, Jews being subjugated, and Muslims being subjugated in many countries by many leaders that profess to be Muslim, Christian, Jewish, and so on. Now, what I'm hoping to see from our different faith traditions is that each and every one of us as individuals, we maybe find it hard to talk about this in our churches or in our synagogues, but we're seeing more and more brave people speak up. And this is in the tradition of Jesus Christ, of Moses, of Muhammad, in which they all struggled. They believed that each and every one of them had the truth, and they were in an extremely uncomfortable situation of people around them, subjugating them and persecuting them. And at the end of the day, we are following in their footsteps towards lifting up the veil of darkness and showing the light of what the truth is. And so my question to you is, in your travels around the world, what are you seeing and what's your message of hope that lets people of faith come together and feel like that they are following in this sacred tradition that all of the prophets or the religious figures that we follow have been preaching towards and that we're following in their ministry?
Actually, I thank you for that question, because you asked me earlier, was this a religious conflict? And so it's not a religious conflict in the sense it's between Muslim and Jew, but as a faithful Christian, and I think a person of faith, whether you're Muslim or Jew, or a secular person of goodwill, that's what we have to focus on being. And so the battle that's going on right now, not only in Israel and Palestine, but around the world, is people who want to follow the good path, whether that came in the name of Christ, and I'm not an ecumenist, I'm actually a traditional Christian. For me, the truth is in Jesus Christ, but there's values that are in every faith, and if each person is following those things, we should recognize that what's going on in Israel, in a place that is so infused with a religious fervor and message, is that why is this conflict happening there now? And what is it a battle between? It's not between Muslim and Jew, it's between those who want to be faithful to the good of the world, of doing good to others, versus those who want to control others, who want to believe that man is the God, and certain men with wealth are the power. And so that's the challenge for all of us. That's really the battle that we should be fighting. Whatever our faith and whatever our belief is, are we working for good for ourselves and for others, or are we working and supporting and allowing those who are controlling us to be in charge?
Amen.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a couple more questions.
Hello, I'm from Minnesota, and I'm very proud of what the networks of people in Minnesota are doing to defend their communities. And the question I'd like everyone to think about is what connects Palestine with ICE? And it's a very simple answer. Here in Palo Alto, the tech company that developed the software for monitoring, surveilling, targeting Palestinians is Palantir. Yep. And what was developed for the Israelis to use in Israel has come back to be used in our communities here in the United States. Many of us have our hearts broken by what is being done to Palestinians, but for those whose hearts are not yet broken, they need to wake up to what is happening with ICE, because what we paid for the Israelis to do to Palestinians has now come back to haunt us.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yep. Well, can I just say something about that?
Yeah.
I was in Australia and I was hoping to meet Anthony Lowenstein. Some of you might have heard of him. He wrote the book, The Palestine Project, and it's exactly about that. And if you go to, you asked me about the checkpoints and how they've changed. If you go to Bethlehem now, people in Bethlehem are being given magnetic stripes. There's facial recognition at the checkpoints. So it's not the crude cubes and cement walls. It's the techniques that are developed here and in Israel that are controlling the population and keeping an eye on everybody. And you're right, yeah, so it's connection. It's sort of like the guinea pig are the Palestinians, and those same tactics are going to be used around the world by those who want to control others.
I've enjoyed hearing these wonderful ideas and valuable testimony tonight. A lot of people have said, what can we do? For 25 years, I've been trying to work on this issue, to raise awareness, to educate people the way you all are doing. And now I'm actually feeling very, very hopeful, because now more and more Americans have wakened up and are speaking out. The majority of Americans now say, surveys have shown this, that they don't want their tax money to go to Israel any longer. What we can do now is a very concrete step. We've started a national campaign focused on congressional districts where people will sign a pledge saying that they will only vote for someone who opposes more tax money to Israel. All of you can do that. I'll hand you a piece of paper that has the website where you can sign that pledge. It takes 1 minute. You can share it with everybody else that you know on social media or by phone or by mail or whatever. This is a concrete step that I think this is a pivotal time. Like you, I feel after these horrible 2 years and more, and decades and more, this is the time we can bring change. It is our country and our tax money that's enabling everything that we're seeing. We have the power to change that. Our politicians won't do that unless we tell them, unless they see hundreds of their constituents saying that we will only vote for someone that opposes money to Israel. So I hope you'll all do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The website I started is If Americans Knew. We have lots of information there that you can print out and give to your friends, booklets, brochures, everything. I know one person was trying to struggle with her church. We can give her material she can give out. I've written a book. Thank you. And the new website is called Voters Against Billions to Israel. Voters Against Billions to Israel. It's a collaboration. I'm hoping that Sabeel will join us and be one of the organizations doing that. We have a local Sabeel. We want national Sabeel to also join.
Thank you. I think Dina has a question.
It's more of a comment. I am a Palestinian Christian with family in Gaza, sheltering at the Holy Family Catholic Church and St. Porphyrius. In Gaza, there were, before October 7th, there were 1,000 Palestinian Christians living in Gaza. Now there's 400. That's 60% of the Christian population in Gaza alone is gone. Many were killed, many evacuated, many died because of the lack of medicine, clean water, just like all other Palestinians. I want to emphasize it is absolutely not a religious issue. It is about oppression, it is about occupation, it's about apartheid, it's about ethnic cleansing, and it's about genocide. And the Palestinians have experienced the slow genocide for the last 80 years and probably beyond. And now it's just been escalating. And Israel, we as Americans are allowing it to happen. We are enabling Israel to continue the slaughter And I cannot, I can't emphasize enough how important it is for each and every one of us to speak to one person who doesn't know. There's a lot of people that actually don't know. They don't know where to start. They've been brainwashed, or they just don't know. Or they don't care because it's not impacting them. I had a neighbor, he's passed on now, and when I first moved into the neighborhood, we were very friendly. My dad was living with me, and my dad used to walk around the neighborhood, God bless you, God bless you. So he was known as the God bless man. And one day, and this neighbor would make chocolate pudding for my dad and so forth. And this one time I saw him wearing, those pins with the two flags, an American flag and an Israeli flag. I was shocked. I was like, so what is that? And he said, he goes, they're, I support them. They're the chosen people. I said, but do you know what they're doing to the Christians in Palestine? And he said, I don't care. I don't care. They're the chosen people, and my money's going there. I said, but your money's going to slaughter people. Just didn't care. And so this is where I think the education, Lanny, you mentioned the Christian Zionists, they're completely brainwashed. So the more we can maybe attend one of the churches and ask, I know they're going to say no, because I know, but go and get involved with the church and see if you can start changing one person at a time, because every person that you meet, they're going to talk about it to the next person, and they're going to talk about it to another person. And that's how we build the momentum. Allison mentioned the majority of Americans don't want our money going to Israel to slaughter. We need the money here. We've got potholes. We've got people who don't have health care. We have issues in our country that need to be addressed. And so the more we can continue to change and change minds and educate, that's where we need to focus our energy. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you.
It's good. So we're going to wrap it up. I am going to give Lucy the last say, but I want to also give a big thank you not only to Mother Agapia, thank you so much, amazing, but also to Pastor Tom Harris. So I'm actually part Indigenous, and I was terrified to come into a church because of my history. And Tom was so open-hearted, and I didn't really think I would fall in love with God, but it's what Gaza taught me, the Muslims, actually. And then also, I fell in love with Jesus because of Palestine. And one story that I want to just quickly share is that I heard of the evangelical story of the resurrection, and that there was going to be this burning of these cows, and then a slaughter of all these people, and the resurrection of the Jesus is a guy with a sword on a horse. And I was like, that's not the Jesus I know. And I was like, well, if Jesus to me is love, and the resurrection is already happening in the hearts of 1 billion people around the world. And we need to keep that momentum because people have fallen in love with Palestine.
Amen.
So.
I just want to thank you so much, Sister Agapia. It's wonderful. And I'm Palestinian, and people call it the Holy Land. And when I told the Anglican bishop it's the Holy Land, he said, there's nothing holy about the land. It's the land of the Holy One, because it has never seen peace. It's always been in war. So he said, don't call it the Holy Land. It's the land of the Holy One. So just a comment to tell you.
Thank you, Lucy.
And by the way, Lucy is a treasure in our community. She's joined the church, and she's a Nakba survivor. So I would really encourage you to hear her stories. And this is her painting right there. So, all right. Thank you all for coming. Really appreciate you.
We hope you don't footsteps.